Well, hey there everybody, Matt Kloskowski here, and in this video we're going to take a look at a very popular landscape effect. It's called the Orton Effect, but if you don't know what that is, it's kind of a softer, dreamy atmosphere that we see in a lot of landscape photos. It's not limited to landscapes, but I'd say most of what we see it in is going to be in a landscape photo. If you do any searching online in some popular websites where a lot of landscape photographers post, you will see this effect over and over again. It was created by Michael Orton back in the 1980s, which is also a time where many great songs and music was created as well. I digress though. But it was created by back in the 1980s. It was a film technique which has been kind of modified to work in digital. You can Google it, find out plenty of information about it. I don't want to go into the history of it. What I want to do is show you kind of the basis of what it is and a few different ways that we can create it. I really want to dive in because I think the magic from this comes in not just seeing how somebody else does it and what everybody else is doing out there, but I want to dive into some ways that you can use it, some ways that you can create it, and then also really show you some of the nitty-gritty around it so that you don't just take what everybody else did, but you also know how you can modify this and make it your own. So let's go ahead and dive in here. I'm going to basically build three different ways to do this. We're going to build in complexity too. So it's going to go from fairly simple here in just Lightroom to some Photoshop stuff. And it's a little bit more of an intermediate type of a tutorial because I'm going to use layer masking, but I won't really cover the basics of all that stuff. Okay. Let's dive into Lightroom here. I'm covering this because I know some people just use Lightroom, and there's things that we can do. So if you go over here to the clarity setting and you crank up clarity, it's obviously going to add some contrast and almost a grungy type of a look to your photo. The Orton effect is based on a softening effect. Okay, if you really go into the details of it, it was two exposures, one that was sharp, one that was out of focus. And so you get almost a blur. Well, if you go negative on clarity, we can actually get a softening type of a look here. So it's not exactly the same that we can get inside of Photoshop, but we can get something similar. And if you want to kind of take a step ahead of what we're doing now, rather than just coming here and just cranking down your clarity setting, what we can do is go to a tool like our graduated filter. All right. I'm going to double click the word effect here. It's going to reset all my sliders, and then I'll just bring clarity down here to, I'll just go negative 100. We'll crank it up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to drag across the image, or you can drag across the image. I usually just drag outside the image, or you can drag across and then just drag it outside. But I'm trying to apply it to the whole entire photo, which is very similar to what we did in the basic panel. Same effect, same thing, just a different way to do it. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I'm going to get access to some different things here. One of those things being, yeah, sure, we can go ahead and we can soften this, but we can also go in here. One of the things of the Orton effect also was that it had the second exposure was brighter. So we can go over here and do things like exposure or even whites to brighten it up. And then you even have the options to maybe pull back on highlights if you find it's too intense in some areas too. So you can, the original effect didn't necessarily account for these things, but these are things I think you can do to add your own flair to it, not just copy what was originally done out there. So we can do things like this. It's also part of the way that we'll do this in Photoshop adds contrast to it. And so we can go over here, of course, and add contrast to the photo, and you'll see it adds quite a bit of contrast. So, and that's part of the effect here. So you may or may not like that level of contrast, but you can always dial that back. And then the other nice thing about doing it with the graduated filter, and really the main reason I did it, is because we have access to the range masking tool here. Okay, and this is at least in the when I say access to it, you need the Creative Cloud version for this. We come down here to luminance, and what I can do right now, it's being applied to the whole photo. If I find, a lot of times I find it goes too much into the blacks, and so what I can do here is limit the range so it's not going into the blacks as much. All right, it's not going into this area right here. It's just going to go between this value of gray and this value of white. We're limiting the range by luminance that this effect, whatever these sliders are, is being applied to. So if you were to zoom in on this photo here, hit Command or Control+, you will see it does have that effect. It does have that softening glow effect to it. That's before and that's after. Things are still sharp. And I'm going to say this again probably several times throughout this. We spend a lot of money on lenses and tripods and camera technique to get sharp photos. We don't want blurry photos. This isn't about blurring your photo. It's about just adding a soft glow to it. Okay, so that there is indeed a way that we can do it here. So you kind of see the Lightroom way. If you want to intensify it, go over to your graduated filter, right click on it and choose duplicate. And that duplicates it and adds another one on top of it. You can see now there's two here. It doesn't duplicate the range mask, or it actually does. It duplicates the range mask exactly because we duplicated the pin. So you could see it adds on top of the effect. And again, some may like it, some may think it's too soft and glowy. This is where your personal taste comes in. Maybe pull back on the clarity on the second one so it's not quite as much. Don't forget you also have a brush. Go to your brush. And you can brush it away from areas where maybe you find that it's too intense. I'll go into erase mode. And if I find out that it's affecting, maybe the water or some area too much, I can go in here and I can brush that away. Okay. So that's the Lightroom way. The next two methods are going to be similar to each other. They're just going to build in complexity, but they're mostly going to rely on Photoshop. I'm going to jump into Photoshop for the next one here. And so the way, again, without going too much into it, because I'll let you research the original technique on your own. I don't want to get into what was done, but I can give you the high-level overview, which is there was two exposures. First one was a base exposure, normal. Second one was brighter, overexposed, and out of focus. So what we can do here in Photoshop is press Command or Control J, duplicates the layer. All right. Now we got our copy. So we need to do two things to this. We need to brighten it, and we need to blur it. All right. The order doesn't really matter. So we'll come up here to Image, Adjustments, Brightness. I'm deliberately not using an adjustment layer for this because I want it to happen on the layer. Image, Adjustments, Brightness. And I'll crank it up usually quite a bit, 30% or so. And then click OK. So you can see that's the original. And then this is our brightened version. And then we're going to come up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I generally blur this about half the megapixels of the camera. So think if your camera is a 20 megapixel camera, I'll generally blur it 10. If it was a 40 megapixel, I'll generally blur it 20. It's not a rule. All right. And then in the final method, in the third method, you're going to see it's going to be a little bit easier for us to finesse this if we want to. So, but we can just go by a guideline here. So let's just go. I think I had to actually size this photo down a little bit, so I'm not going to blur it quite as much here. But the next example will blur exactly half of what I did. And then we'll click OK. And then what we have to do next is change the blend mode. Here's where things diverge. All right, you're going to see several different ways to do this. The most common ways that I see are overlay and soft light. And they both do the same. They're both going to add contrast to the photo, but they're also going to hide the blur, but still keep a softening. You'll see here. Let's just click overlay. Okay. And then I'll click on soft light. So very, very similar. Just one is a little bit contrasty, a little bit more glowy, a little bit more intense than the other one. So we'll go with overlay on this one, but it's totally okay. Sometimes you might want to pull back and use soft light. And then sometimes you'll see, if you watch tutorials online, you'll see multiply being used as well. And it just depends on the mood of the photo. There might be a technical right answer to this, to what Michael Orton originally envisioned for this, but in this day and age, there is no right answer to it. It's what you like. Sometimes I like when the photo gets really dark and I'm just exposing the bright parts of it. That looks kind of cool. But we'll go down here. I'll stick with overlay for this. And then I'll bring the opacity down to 0. And I do that a lot with this effect. And then bring it gradually up until I get it to a point where I like it. All right. And a few things happen. Let's first zoom in and take a look at a little bit of the effect here. You're going to see that especially areas that have light get almost a soft glow to them. Sometimes it's even described as a dreamy effect. It's got atmosphere to it. And you'll find that the photos that have more depth to them, the more depth, the more atmosphere, the better. Okay, because this glow, this type of effect, the softness really starts to, especially the further away we get from the camera, you'll start to see some pretty nice atmospheric effects taking place. A lot of times, whenever I have atmospheric perspective as things get lighter and hazier as they go away. People will always say, like, why don't you use the dehaze slider? I don't want that. I want that depth to my photo. So I would never use dehaze on that. I use dehaze when haze is just overwhelming. But to me, I like that. I like that atmospheric perspective. And when I can enhance it like I'm doing here, even better. Again, you get that, again, soft glow it's almost a dreamy effect. Areas that are lit tend to get a nice glow and a nice warm light to them as well. So what's inevitable, some might redo the photo. I'm going to leave that in there. What's inevitably going to happen is, you're going to have to get this away from parts of the photo. All right, so let's pull it back. You're going to have to get this away from parts of the photo. A lot of times what I'll see is the darks get too dark, the blacks get too black. I can go over to this layer over here, double click anywhere. It's going to open up the layer style dialog. In the layer style dialog, I'm going to go down here to blend if, and I'm going to hold down the option key on the Mac or the alt key on the PC. Click on this slider. When I hold down option or alt, it splits it, and it'll fade out some of those blacks a little bit from this top layer that caused those blacks to get too intense in the first place. It'll fade that out a little bit. So that's one option. You can try that on the highlights too. You can start to fade out some of those highlights. You got to be careful because sometimes you'll fade out the glow. So it's kind of a catch-22. We'll click OK on this one. I think I would probably pull the opacity back quite a bit. And then the biggest thing that I'll see is when you have a bright sky, if you're shooting into the sun, we're going to have to pull back on the sky a little bit. We're going to have to mask that out. So I add a layer mask, press B for my brush tool, set the foreground color to black, and I would go up here and I would mask out any bright areas from the sky. And you'll see that done quite a bit. I'm going to show you one more example here where, oh, by the way, let's take a look. So that's before. That's after. Again, a little bit of a nice soft glow. You can adjust the opacity as you need and as you want that intensity or don't want that intensity. And so what happens on a photo, you'll see this used a lot on twilight photos. Photos without the sun works really, really nice. Again, the more depth there is, the better it's going to work. So I'll run through this one a little faster. Command or Control J, image, adjustments, brightness. Crank that up here. Let's go 30, 40%. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And this was a 40 megapixel camera, so I'll about split it right around 20. Click OK. And then go down here and change that blend mode. We can try multiply, probably way too dark, overlay, or soft light. Okay, any one of those. I'll stick with soft light on this one. And then as you zoom in, you're going to see a glowy, soft type of an effect to this. Okay, it's got that soft glow to it. Now, same thing as before. We can double click the layer, open up the layer style dialog. We can option or alt click on our black slider, and we can start to bring back some of those darks. Okay, I'm trying to look to make sure I don't get a halo around some of these trees here. And then the other thing is you might notice sometimes it makes it too intense as far as colors go. And if that happens, you can go Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, and pull back on the saturation a little bit. All right, and that'll take some of that intensity away. And of course, you've got your layer mask. You've got all those tools that you can go in here and adjust what you just did. Okay, last way to do this. Before we do that, quick word from our sponsor, which is me. I thank you for watching these videos. I hope you enjoy them. And really, honestly, the biggest thing that I could ask a favor for is to just follow. So wherever you're watching these videos, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook, YouTube obviously has a subscribe, Facebook has a like. That would be great. And then another big thing is just to get notified so that I don't have to blast people with emails and post it, over and over again. If you turn notifications on, so YouTube has a little bell that you can ring, and Facebook's got a little notification area that you can set up to get notifications in your little list there, and that way you won't miss any of the videos when I post them. Okay, back to our story. So the last method still uses Photoshop, but we're going to start this one in Lightroom and kind of talk a little bit about workflow. And let's go over here to reset the stuff that I did before. A lot of people will ask, what do you do as far as pre-processing? Very, very little. All right. I'll do some shadows and highlights, maybe a quick exposure or white balance, but I typically don't do whites and blacks or contrast or anything, because this effect adds a lot of that. So it's like, why set a white and black point when that's going to change dramatically later on? So I typically don't put a lot of color or contrast into the photo, just some basic shadow and highlight toning, which again, we may come back and change later again. So we do that. The next part, we're going to go photo, edit in. We're going to open this in Photoshop, but we're going to do it a different way. We're going to open it as a smart object into Photoshop. And the reason being is smart object's going to give us a couple of different ways to do things. And you'll notice it's a smart object because it's got that little icon in the bottom right corner. So we want to make a copy of the smart object. In fact, we want to make 2 copies. The first way I'm going to make a copy is a little bit different. I'm not going to hit Command or Control J. I'm going to right click and choose New Smart Object via Copy. Reason I did that is now these are separate. The cool thing about a smart object is when I double click it, it's going to go into Camera Raw again. It's going to let me adjust my settings. If I did this with Command or Control J, when I went into one layer, they're linked and it would do the same thing to the other layer. But this way, by doing right clicking and doing New Smart Object via Copy, they're not linked and they're separate. And that's what I want. Now for the next copy, I am going to press Command or Control J because I want them to be linked. So now we have our top 2 copies. Let's go name this one Overexposed, and let's name this one Glow. Okay, atmospherical, whatever you want to name it. The Orton Glow, Atmosphere, any one of those will work. And then we're gonna do one more thing just to keep things tidy. We're gonna click on the top one, shift click on the middle one, and press Command or Control G, or you can just come up here, Layer. And we're going to group these together. So just come right down there and group them together. Okay. This will all start to become a little bit more clear in a minute here. Let's hide the glow. Let's go to our overexposed layer. Double click on it. It's going to open in Camera Raw. How much do I overexpose? Usually a stop and a half over whatever it was, whatever you had set it to originally. There's no rule for that. It's just generally that's what I'll do. But again, we're going to be able to change this in a second. You're going to see this is a very non-destructive way to do it. We'll click OK. You're going to see both of these layers adjust, which is good. That's what I want. And we're going to go to the top layer, turn that one on, and now we're going to apply our blur. So let's go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And this was a 42 megapixel camera, so at that 21, 22, somewhere around there, right? That seems like a pretty good number right there. We'll click OK. And you're going to also notice, because this was a smart object layer, not only can we go back and forth to Camera Raw, but it also makes filters smart filters. And this is really going to come in handy in just a second here. But you'll notice one of the other things is we still have to apply a blend mode. I'll usually go and apply the blend mode to the group. Okay, not to an individual layer inside of the group, which by all means you're welcome to experiment with. I usually go in here and apply the blend mode to the group. Again, we got multiply, kind of cool. We got overlay, and we got soft light. Okay, let's go. I'm kind of tempted to go, yes, too much. Let's go overlay. Okay, so we're going overlay on this one. And of course, a layer group has opacity. So we would bring that down to 0, and then we would start to climb up and start to bring that glow in. Okay. Here's what's really neat about this effect, and that is because we did it with smart object layers, we can change this in so many different ways. Let's say the water is too intense. We can double click on our layer here, and we can go over here and we can pull back on the highlights. You can use your adjustment brush to go back in here and paint over areas that started to get a little bit too bright, a little too overexposed inside of that look there. You can pull back on your overall exposure. Okay, if you find that was too much, click OK, and you're going to notice it goes in here and it updates everything. Because we did our Gaussian blur on a smart layer, we can go in here and we can just paint away the blur with that layer mask. Just set your foreground color to black, press B for your brush tool, and then I can go in here, and I'm going to use 100% opacity. I can go in here and I can brush away the glow from any parts of the photo that I don't want. Okay, so that's going to come in really handy. And then you can adjust the glow. So I'm going to zoom in, Command or Control plus. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And part of this glow is if you were to imagine, what's really happening is let's change this back over to where it was before, crank up our opacity. We're blurring colors, and we're blurring colors in past lines of other colors. So while the glow can look good, sometimes you don't want certain colors to bleed into each other. So that's something that you can go in here and you can adjust. Again, we'll go down here, change our blend mode back, reduce the opacity. Okay, and then we can go down here to double click on Gaussian blur. It's going to open up that blur dialog box, and now we can get a real-time view because we've already placed all of our layers exactly where we want. We can get a real-time view of exactly what this technique is going to look like, exactly what this blur is going to look like on our photo. So, the guesswork is now gone. As we kind of were guessing a little bit before, but doing this way, the guesswork is totally gone, and we can go in here and get a nice live preview of exactly how that works. Okay, so Command or Control minus to zoom out. We can hide those layers. In fact, easiest thing to do is turn on the layers and go up here and hide that layer group. That's before, that's after. As you've seen, everything is changeable. We can double click, we can change the blacks, we can paint mask out blacks, we can do whatever we need to do to get this to the look that we want. And that's really what I was hoping with this. This is one thing to show you the formula to get there. And this is a very popular technique. You'll see a lot of people using it. However, I don't just want to show you what everybody's doing. I want to show you the basics of that. It's good to learn it, but then I want to show you how you can go in and make it your own. Okay? Folks, hope you enjoy this. And as I mentioned earlier, would love if you would just subscribe to the YouTube page or like on the Facebook page, and you'll get notifications whenever I release a new video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again real soon.